All right, Thanks for coming back to the show. I can't even speak. I'm so just in awe of today's guest. You've already seen his name on the podcast episode. I just want to jump right into it because I think, I'm all about bringing value, and I think today is going to be 1,000% value. So help me welcome the wise, the wonderful, Mr. Russell Dinkins. Russell, how are you, sir?
I'm doing alrighty, doing alrighty.
If you're watching on YouTube, you got your name Russell D. I feel like that's like your rap name or something. Like I feel like I should change mine to Mike C or something like that, man. I love it. I love it.
Russell, yeah.
Do you even, we didn't even talk about this, and of course, this has nothing to do with what we're going to talk about today, but I love talking about whatever. But I brought up rap. What kind of music are you into? I'm a big hip
Mm,
hop guy. That's why I ask.
oh, cool. I listen to probably the kind of like more experimental R&B, or so like R&B that is a little bit more kind of underground or has a little bit of a house influence, like
Mm,
90s house influence. Also that has a neo soul or kind of an older school rap influence. So I do
yeah.
listen to some artists that kind of bridge, rap and R&B. But none of them are like super popular. So I don't
Right.
really, but I do listen to a lot of other things. I listen to pop. I listen to K-pop. I listen to world music. I do listen to listen to some rap. And I not some of the newer stuff. I really,
Yeah.
the rap that I enjoy most is kind of in the 90s.
So
Uh,
did you watch the halftime show then of the
I
Super
did watch
Bowl?
the halftime show. Yeah,
Yeah, I was on the road, so I didn't get to watch it. But my wife and I, because she did get to watch it, we rewatched it. Oh man,
yeah,
that's right up my alley. I mean, Snoop and Dre and Eminem. That's what I grew up on. The Chronic CD, it was the best. Now it's actually all what they call CAH, Christian hip hop. So it's Lecrae and KB and Triple E.
right,
That's who I listen to now. But
right,
okay, so none of that was value to you listeners, but
right.
so excited, Russell, to have you here. If you don't know who Russell is, I'm going to give him a few minutes, seconds here to give us a 30,000 foot level. But honestly, if you just Google Russell Dinkins track and field or Russell Dinkins podcast, my man is super experienced on this. In fact, I just listened to a podcast last month with you and the good lawyer that we met at USTFCA. Tell me his name. I got to give him
Yeah,
respect.
Arthur Bryant.
There you
Yeah.
go. Yeah. And some of the things that they've done with Clemson and Minnesota, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But we're really going to focus, Russell, on proactivity. So this should be listened to by every college coach, want to be future college coach, et cetera, administrators. We're going to talk about the state of track and field for college and what we can do proactively moving forward. But before that, Russell, why don't you give us like a 30,000 foot level, kind of give us that bio, who you are, what you've done, and what you do now.
All right, great. Well, thanks for that. Yeah, so as you guys know, my name is Russell Dinkins. Since the summer of 2020, I have helped to save four track and field teams, men's teams that were slated for elimination by using a variety of different tactics from social media to traditional media and also a legal strategy. I got into this work by happenstance. I wrote an article after Brown University decided to cut their track and field program about the racial implications of that decision. As a lot of us know, track and field is a very racially and socioeconomically diverse sport. And it is much more diverse than other non-revenue or Olympic sports, which tend to be very homogenous along racial and socioeconomic lines. And so that article went viral. Brown changed their decision. The Brown University team, they organized themselves. I mostly wrote an article to help that team. But then after that program got saved, I kind of became the go-to guy and was able to help other university teams strategize, organize, and ultimately win their teams after they were slated for elimination. So the teams that we helped save were Brown University, University of Minnesota, William and Mary, and then the last was Clemson, which involved the legal strategy. Since then, I have been brought on as the executive director of the Tracksmith Foundation, which the mission of the organization is to help bolster and support and advance track and field as an equitable opportunity provider across the board. And so, not only helping colleges that are slated for elimination, but also looking at how we can support track and field at the grassroots level, at the youth level and beyond. And so we'll be doing lots of great work. I'm really excited about the opportunity. We're just starting, so we're still building out the organizational scaffolding right now, but looking to make some announcements about some of the projects we're going to be working on the next coming months.
I love how you brought up about track and its diversity, because you brought up specifically the socioeconomic status, racial status of diversity there. It goes even beyond that, right? Body type, tall, short, big, skinny, short, fast, slow. I was slow, so that's how I can tell you it's diverse for that. But I do. That's the thing that I love about track and field over every other sport. And somebody right now is thinking, well, football, linemen and receiver. It's like, yeah. No women. We ain't, there's not an equal amount or even close to an equal amount of women availability in that sport. But I just love that. I mean, I love literally like anybody who is anybody can do something in track and field. We're not all going to be state champs and all Americans and pros, but you can contribute in some form or fashion to your high school team, your middle school team, et cetera, man. I love it. It's one of the things that drew me to track and field way back in the day from the get-go. Actually, I thought it would be really easy is why I joined track and field, and I found out that is not the case. You got to work hard. You do have to have that aspect for you there. When you've been involved in these different programs, Russell, what is your I want to ask you, like, what's your education background? I mean, did you major in, I don't even know what in the world you would major for something like this? Or is this kind of happenstance that you just, because it was a fellow Ivy League school, you wrote that article and then you became the quote unquote figurehead for this, which that's okay. Happenstance is a good thing too, as well. What's that? Is there any background there for this?
It's funny. I was thinking about this a little while ago, and it's funny how things kind of prepare you for other things in the future, and you don't necessarily even realize it. So I majored in sociology in college, and so a lot of times people ask me, why are you majoring in sociology? And I didn't even really have a great answer for it at the time. It was the only major that seemed to have the kind of mixture of interests that I wanted to study. But I didn't really see how I could make that applicable to kind of like real world situation. But sociology was great because it forces you to look at kind of societal issues and to look at data and to make inferences based off of the data, to make really clear arguments about society and about the impacts of certain decisions. And so that kind of training that I got through my sociology courses and the independent work that I had to do, directly translated into some of the work that I'm doing now. I mean, also with Princeton, which is where I went to school. I went to Princeton University, for those who don't know. We have to do independent work. So I had to write a junior paper that was about 30 pages. And then I had to write a thesis. It was about 100 something pages, independent research on topics. And I focused on the experiences of low-income students in college. And so just being attuned to that and knowing the data and knowing how low-income students have different challenges and experiences in the collegiate space was really helpful. But then when I think about more broadly, my first real job was working at Princeton University, and that came from a proposal. I was speaking to an administrator after I graduated, kind of complaining about how I felt Princeton could be better in certain areas. And this administrator said, yeah, you should write a proposal to the university. So I said, you know what, I will. So I wrote a proposal and said, hey, I just graduated from here, but I think that Princeton could be better in this way, this way, and this way. And they hired me for 3 years. And it was in a role that I helped create. It was to support first generation and low income students. First generation, for those who don't know, means the first generation in their family to attend college. And so, people think Princeton University, the Ivy League, there aren't many of those who fit in that category. And that was true. That was true when I was a student, but the makeup of the student body has changed drastically, which is great. But that means that there were a lot of students who didn't necessarily know how to navigate an Ivy League space. And so, I created programs and resources from scratch for 3 years. And it was really great. Some of the data and programs that I created still exist at Princeton, even after I left. And, so that was kind of a small foray into it. But I kind of think I've always had a little bit of zeal for kind of challenging systems. In high school, I was in Massachusetts for high school. I went to boarding school up there. I'm from Philly, but I went to boarding school in Massachusetts. And Massachusetts did not have a web administrator for MouseSplit at the time. And so me being 16 years old, I knew that I needed to be on MouseSplit in order to get recruited. And so I emailed the Pennsylvania webmaster for MouseSplit, said, hey, there's no webmaster for Massachusetts. I'm from Philly, this, that, and the third. I'm an athlete that's trying to get recruited. And he said, okay, well, I can't do anything about the webmastering thing, but what I can do is I can give you access to uh, to your team, and then you can make your profile. So coaches are only supposed to have access to a team, but I got access to my team, so I was able to create my team's profile. Then I was able to create my own profile so that I could. And then after that, I emailed meet directors so that I can get into invitationals that would upload to MouseSplit. So because I was like, I need to get seen, because running at the prep school the prep school circuit, we just competed against other prep schools in dual and tri meets. And then there was a prep school championship that didn't upload the MouseSplit either. And so there was no way to really be visible. And so I knew that I needed to kind of get outside of that if I wanted to get recruited. And so, I was like, all right, well, I need to get into these meets, but I also need these meets to have that data uploaded to something. And so, yeah, so that was very, very, and I think a lot of other, so yeah, I've always kind of been like, okay, I need to, if there's something that doesn't exist, let me figure out how to create it. Kind of a kind of entrepreneurial spirit. And so, I didn't necessarily realize that, kind of all these kind of experiences that I've had really naturally led into this organizational work that I've done now. And the way that I got into it, honestly, I was talking with the Brown organizers right after the school announced they were cutting their program. And I was talking to them, and I was angry, and they were angry. And I said, hey, an op-ed needs to be written about these points. And they said, yeah, we're trying to get an op-ed written. We're trying to work with the Washington Post, New York Times, and traditional outlets. And that's a really reasonable, rational kind of way of approaching it. And I said, okay, that's cool. And then for some reason, it just struck me, I need to just write something. So I wrote something on my personal Medium page. And my thought was I could write it, and then maybe Brown could use what I wrote to show traditional media outlets so that they could, cover the story. But I just didn't really realize that, or unbeknownst to me, the thing that I wrote would be the actual catalyst for change. And the thing that I wrote would be this piece that would go viral. I mean, I did not have a large platform. I had 400 followers on Twitter. I've written about 5 pieces on Medium before writing this one, and the most readership that I've gotten before that was about 1,000, for one of my pieces. So I wasn't expecting. I didn't write it with the intention of, oh, this is going to get viral. I was just writing it really because I just felt like I just need to get these ideas out. And then 2, I thought, okay, if I write this, they could show this article like with all these arguments to a traditional outlet, and then maybe that traditional outlet would be convinced that this is something worthy of covering or worthy of writing their own op-ed or something like that. So yeah, it just kind of but then after that article went viral, when it came time to helping William and Mary and University of Minnesota, which I was reluctant to do because I was really, when those teams reached out to me, I said, hey, I wrote an article, and that article helped to publicize or make
Bring awareness.
it helped to thank you, spread awareness about this issue in the public domain. But I didn't do any organizational work. The Brown University alumni and students and parents, they organized themselves, and they were doing work behind the scenes, talking to influential folks at Brown University. So it's like, I don't necessarily, you guys are reaching out to me. I don't know if I can, can replicate what I did for Brown here, because all I did for Brown was, write an article, and it went viral. And I worked hard after I saw that article went viral. When I saw that article was picking up steam, I then reached out to Let's Run. I reached out to a different people with large Twitter followings. We finally got Malcolm Gladwell to retweet. I was working hard on that. So it's like I spent about a week, the entire week that the article was out before the university reversed their decision within a week. So that was pretty cool. Yeah. But I, basically spent my entire day just online looking through Princeton alumni like databases to see like who had a large Twitter following, and emailing them the story, and just trying to get as much of a push of the story after I saw that it was picking up steam and that it was going viral naturally. I was like, okay, well, let me, kind of use that organic, movement, and be strategic about it and try to push it out. But yeah, so with the University of Minnesota and with William and Mary, I was like, guys, I don't necessarily know if I could do this, but let me try. And what really was the impetus for getting involved was when the University of Minnesota went down, when they announced they were cutting their team. I was like, okay, this is going to be bad, because this is the first like Power 5 school. It's like, I need, not to say that I didn't care about William and Mary, but I saw that this issue was going to get worse if I didn't get involved. And so I hit up two of the core organizers for Brown, Brent Smith and Jordan Mann. Jordan is an elite steeplechaser. He competed at the Olympic trials this past year. And said, okay, let's build a toolkit based off of the organizational stuff that you guys did at Brown. So built a toolkit full of resources. And then we also created a video, and we kind of walked through exactly how they organized and structured themselves. And then I provided that toolkit to William and Mary and to the University of Minnesota's organizers, helped them organize. And then after I gave them the toolkit, I had a Zoom meeting with William and Mary and with the University of Minnesota's organizers, just to kind of discuss how they could organize and structure themselves. After that, I kind of did check-ins with both. William and Mary, they were able to kind of move a little bit more independently. They just had, the capacity to kind of do things a little bit on their own. With University of Minnesota, I was more involved in that process, and was a part of all the organizational meetings, providing strategy on how they could leverage an effective message. And for University of Minnesota, I wrote an op-ed that got published in the Star Tribune that probably was one of the important factors in getting their outdoor team reinstated. So yeah, no, it's just long story short, I kind of got into this work. Part of me says happenstance, but upon reflection, it's become clear to me that wow, I've had a number of experiences that have given me kind of background to be able to kind of enter into this space, and to have success. I mean, someone who's never done organizational work like this, to be able to jump into it and to be able to help 3 schools organize and be successful, it was truly kind of like a blessing. So
Yeah, I love the story all the way back from high school in Massachusetts of this proactivity of you. You saw that there was a need that was missing, the mile split, and you're like, well, you didn't go. Your story wasn't, I'm going to go find someone to do it. You're like, or I'm going to complain that it's not there. You're like, all right, how do I get access? And I'll do it. And then you graduate from Princeton, and you're like, man, I think you guys could do better. And I love that. I don't know if you talked to an administrator or a professor, and they said, all right, we'll write a proposal, because that's really key. Because a lot of people will complain, and then when challenged to do something about it, we're like, well, it's not for me to, who am I? It's easy to back out of it. And you're like, all right, I will write a proposal. And that led to a job that you created. Those are special jobs. It's one thing to get a job, and we should all be working in a field that we have passion for. But to create your own job, that's what a Princeton grad would do. Of course, Russell, I love it. I love it. And then I love that the thought process of writing that post that went viral for Brown was like you were almost like trying to give like it sounds like anyway. Not the content itself, but like, oh, here's the background for the content. Now, Washington Post and Times and the Brown News, you take some of this data and my viewpoints from having, because you had permission to be involved, right, as an athlete, as an Ivy League athlete, specifically in track and field, specifically an African American, because that's what this topic was about with Brown. I'm a huge social media guy, as a lot of people know, especially on Twitter. When Brown changed their mind, when they did the right thing and kept what they were supposed to keep and not drop what they were supposed to drop, like I gave them a lot of props. And I had some people like, why are you giving them props? Like, hey man, like it's a big step to say I was wrong. Even if you think, well, it was only because Russell did this and the students did this, great. They still easily could have stuck with their guns and said, no, we made a decision, we're not going back, right? It's hard to say I was wrong and to change your mind. So I gave all props to Brown, and I give half props to Minnesota, right? Because they kept outdoor, but they didn't do indoor. And of course, Clemson and William and Mary, I'm proud that they made the right decisions and, realized the mistake they made and reversed course there. So I wish they wouldn't have gone through all the cost and hassle and emotional angst that they went through, but I'm very glad that for future generations, as we move on here, people will be able to go to those schools and participate in track and field. And yet the key of it is exactly what I said right there at the beginning, to go to those schools. Those are great schools to go to and get educations. Not like Princeton or Troy. That's the top 2 schools in the universe. Troy we call the Princeton of the South. So it kind of makes a lot of sense there. Well, I love that your background there is really keyed on that word proactivity, that you went out and did stuff. Instead of reacting to stuff, you would be proactive to it. And that's really what I want to focus on today with you here, Russell, is, every college, you kind of started saying this, when you said Minnesota was important because this could be a bad domino, right? And we kind of saw that, not necessarily that Clemson did it because of Minnesota, but we saw now Clemson, a powerhouse in the ACC and a powerhouse in the NCAA, dropping track and field. It gives administrators sometimes cover that, oh, well, look, if Clemson did it, see, I can do it over here at such and such university. So what we need to be thinking about, in my opinion, is no matter what college you're at, whether you're at Arkansas, NCA&T, UCLA, Troy, Bowdoin College, Nebraska, Wesley, it doesn't matter, that I don't want to put the fear mongering out there, Russell, that like you're always on the chopping block, but I'd rather be preaching to coaches that they should be proactively doing things to preserve and survive and thrive their programs. So what are some things, Russell, as you're talking to coaches right now that are in college, there's no indication that they're going to be dropped, but they think, in my head, I should be doing stuff to make sure my program doesn't get dropped. What are some things that maybe coaches should be focusing on besides the X's and O's and how to coach?
Gotcha. Yeah, great question. So firstly, what I will say is a number of the programs that we worked with, apparently the alumni and staff communities were pretty blindsided by Well, I mean staff. I mean the track and field staff specifically.
Mm.
Uh,
Oh, the coaching staff. There was
um,
no like heads up.
yeah, no.
Mm.
Apparently, a lot of these decisions were kind of blindsided. These schools. There was one school. I won't mention the school just to
Right.
protect the
Right.
coaching staff there. But there was one school that said that they did, upon reflection, could see that
Mm.
things were happening because there were certain budgetary restrictions and things like that that had been occurring in the years prior. And then there was another school where um, the administrators told them, okay, yeah, don't worry about recruiting for next year or something like that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Um,
That's a big red flag.
yeah,
When they
yeah,
tell you, I mean, that's the lifeblood, right? Especially for track because we have upwards of
right,
100 plus. If they tell you not to recruit, automatic red flag, 100%.
right,
Right. Right. Right.
right. So yeah, this is like second or third hand knowledge. So it was something to the effect of, um, you know, it was something regarding recruiting and um, oh yeah, you guys have already recruited enough or something like that. It was
Mm.
something to that effect. So, but a lot of these coaches, said that they didn't necessarily realize at the time, but retrospect they realized it.
Mm.
Um, but in general, a lot of them did feel pretty blindsided by the cuts. So that's not to kind of encourage paranoia,
Right.
amongst all the coaches. I'm not trying to do that at all, but it's just to let you know that um, it is something that can occur even at institutions where it doesn't seem likely or probable. And one thing that I did mention at okay, let me try to get this, the US TFCCCA convention, I got it right,
Nice.
um, was that was that one of the national media outlets that reported on the Clemson story after Clemson announced that they were reinstating their track and field team after threat of lawsuits. I have to add, so they didn't come to that decision of their own volition. This reporter told me that uh, a number of that there was apparently a meeting between the AD of Clemson, Dan Radakovich, and a number of other ADs at top universities and also conference commissioners. And this meeting occurred not too long after Clemson announced they were cutting their track and field program. And apparently at this meeting, there were um, uh, talks about how Clemson was able to do it, and other conference commissioners and athletic ADs were chiming in about how they could potentially replicate something at their institutions or within their conferences. Now, this reporter said that he did not have enough kind of evidence to publish this detail, but that it came from a pretty solid source. And I also heard this information from another person. And so, I can't, say that this definitely for sure happened, but it seems very probable, or it seems like it is a real possibility that it could have occurred.
Well, let
And
me
so,
get your opinion on that, Russell. Sorry to cut you off
yeah,
there because that actually so a lot of times, and most communications happen through social for me. So social media, when this stuff was going down, there is this anger, and I understand anger, and we sometimes don't really flesh out what we're thinking, especially on social media world, right? That there's anger, that there's like this secret, and I'm going to describe exactly what you just described, unfortunately, that there's like this secret cabal of college administrators that hate track and field, and that's why they're dropping it, right? I've always fought against that, mainly because I have a little bit of personal experience with it. When I was at Ball State, I was on the women's coaching staff. We had separate teams there, and our new AD at the time, who's now the AD at University of North Carolina, Bubba Cunningham, dropped men's track and field. And when I was leaving to go to Mississippi State, I went in. We kind of had this relationship because our last names were the same, and I was from Alabama, but he was the one called Bubba. I don't know, just but so I went into him. I was like, hey man, just I'm going to Mississippi State, etc. No hard feelings. I feel like you felt like you had to make a business decision, and he really did like track and field. I mean, so much so that I was a lowly women's assistant coach for 2 years, and only 1 year under him, I believe, if I remember correctly. Years later, I visit North Carolina, and I go to his office just to say hi. I knew he wouldn't even remember me, or anything, and thought I'd just get blown off, like he would just, tell his secretary, "Yeah, get this guy out of here." He came out of a budget meeting to say hi to me, remembered me. At the very least, maybe didn't remember my name, but like remembered that I worked under Sue Parks and all that kind of like he has some intentionality with people and relationships. But you just described that secret cabal that I fight against. That is like, that can't be true. What is your opinion on it? Do administrators in general? This is a big overstatement, right? Because there's thousands of different people who make up this group called administrators. Do they have something against track and field? And what in the world could it be? I don't understand.
So I don't think it's personal in that way. I don't think they just have an aversion to track and field as a sport in concept. That's not the sense that I get.
Good.
The sense that I get is that a lot of athletic departments view track and field, and more specifically men's track and field, as just a nuisance, because it is a sport that in aggregate, is pretty expensive. Now, it's not expensive per capita. It's not expensive by season. It's actually not an expensive sport at all. But since track and field typically carries large rosters, and since it's 3 seasons of play instead of 1 season of play, let's be real. It's 3 sports as the NCAA counts it. But their universities are able to conveniently just count it as 1 sport when it's advantageous for them. They count it as 3 sports when they count up the number of sports they offer, but they count it as 1 sport when they're talking about budgetary issues, which is, they're having their cake and eating it too, because they also, as coaches know, your coaches are being paid, to coach multiple sports, but they just get 1 paycheck, for double or triple the work of, of other college teams. So yeah, so that was I just kind of lost my train of thought a little bit, but
so you think it's more of just the nuisance.
Thank you.
I like how you put that, the cake or eat it too, because it's 3 sports when we count cross, indoor, and outdoor. When you have the women's team, those 3 sports help counteract for Title IX reasons, for the football, things like that. But when they're looking at cutting track, they're typically looking at 1 sport. Like, okay, this coaching staff, this 50, 60 kids, it's all one in that world. That's an interesting take on that.
Right. So yeah, thanks for getting me back on track there. No pun intended, but or pun intended,
but we're good.
Yeah. So I just think they view it as, as being a nuisance, because it's okay. It's a sport that, like I said, in aggregate, it's expensive, even though I already explained that, it's not that expensive when you break it down. But in aggregate, it's an expensive sport. And also for Title IX reasons, as coaches know, Title IX proportionality, universities can either add more women's opportunities or they can take away men's opportunities. And the biggest bang for your buck, if you take away a 50% male track roster, that ends up being about 90 Title IX opportunity slots. And so if you cut track, you have financial savings, but then you also have Title IX kind of savings. And I think that combination is why track and field ends up being a really attractive kind of target when budgetary or Title IX issues come up. Because here's the thing, when I looked at and we'll get into this a little bit later, but when I looked at the financial reports for the different schools I worked with, at least for Minnesota and for Clemson, track and field did not have the largest net loss at the end of the year. Baseball and oftentimes soccer did. So they weren't they weren't losing the most money from track and field. They were losing more money from these other sports, but those other sports didn't provide kind of the Title IX benefits that track and field would provide. And also in some of these places, those sports have more of a kind of connection to the community. I can't really speak to soccer, but baseball tends to be a little more popular. People go to those games, and so there's a bit more of a cultural connection. And then also with the schools that I worked with, the baseball teams were a lot more entrenched in kind of the political infrastructure of the school. What I mean by that, they have presences on the trustee boards. They had strong alumni kind of organization. And we'll get into, that's kind of one of the main things that I think college coaches for track and field can think about how do you get more integrated into that sphere, because I think that's the biggest way to kind of protect yourself. Because soccer and baseball, and specifically baseball, they were not targeted at these two institutions, even though they lost more money. Baseball lost a considerable amount more money compared to track and field in both of these cases. And yet, they were not considered. And my argument has never been, that those teams need to be removed instead of track and field.
Right.
But it's just like, if you're saying you need to remove the team due to financial reasons, this is not your biggest financial sink. There are other programs that actually incur a larger cost when you account for revenues and expenses, and yet track and field is the target. And so I think they view it as a nuisance for all three of those reasons. It's an expensive sport. It has a big Title IX cost in terms of male participation, and then they're not getting anything out of it in terms of cultural or political value. And so there's no connection to the community. People don't really care about it in that way. I mean, we care about it, but like the broader community, there's not really that connection there. In general, I know there's certain track and field programs that do have really strong connections. But in general, that's not necessarily a big thing. And then two, there's not. I mean, again, this is just anecdotal, but all of the schools I worked with, so Brown, University of Minnesota, William and Mary, and Clemson, none of them had a alumni kind of infrastructure in place. They now have them, which is good, and they're really being intentional about making sure that those kind of organizations live on and are strong. But they didn't exist before the teams were cut. And just speaking to other coaches, apparently that's not unique to these institutions. And so, I know it seems like track and field coaches, they have so much to deal with, and really that should be something that's headed by passionate alumni. But, in order to be resilient, I do believe that these programs need to start a strong alumni kind of organization. And then if something is started, the alumni should be able to keep it running on their own. But something that shows alumni buy-in, stakeholder buy-in, shows a record of committed kind of donor support. And it doesn't need to be major big dollar donors. It just needs to be kind of committed, consistent donor giving to the school. Those are things that are all really, really important in kind of showing a program as being valuable, because from an administrator standpoint, if they're just looking at nuts and bolts and they're looking at numbers and they're disaggregating that from the actual humans that are behind the numbers, which has been my argument entirely, is I don't really care about any of these numbers or any of these concerns that you guys have. these are real opportunities that benefit students that are just, in terms of demographics, are different in terms of their race and also in terms of social economics. And sometimes those are the same and sometimes they're different. I mean, you cannot be from rural wherever and get onto a lacrosse team in general. I mean, you cannot be from, a low income inner city environment and and earn a spot on a crew team in general. There's always select individuals or people who get into this one program that might be in some place.
Right.
But in general, those things don't occur. But we all know in track and field, you can be from a school that only has one coach and you're the only good athlete, and you throw a shot put out the ring, you know what I mean? And it uploads to Mouse Split or uploads to Direct Athletics or what have you.
Right.
And the coach says, oh my gosh, have you seen this kid? They're recruited, and now that kid may be the first in their family to ever go to college. Like, that sort of thing is not that unique in track and field. Whereas that is unique for a lot of these other sports where you have to go to sports camps and you have to go to combines, you have to make highlight reels, and it depends on what league you're in. And are you in the travel league? And all these other things that create financial and structural barriers to entry and make the real cost of each recruitment slot prohibitively expensive. Track and field's cost for each recruitment slot is just materially different. And so, to me, it's like, yeah, all the numbers and all of the Town 9, all that stuff can be figured out if you were actually concerned about the impact these decisions have. A lot of times administrators don't do that. They just look at the numbers. And if you're just looking at the numbers, track and field would be an easy target because you can cut it for Town 9 reasons. You save about $1 million. You don't have to worry about pushback from like an alumni kind of infrastructure or from the trustees, because there's not really a presence there in general. And then there's no like cultural value or something that you can lean on in terms of what you're getting back, the kind of the intangibles. And then also the tangible, there's not a kind of donor infrastructure around that sport either. So it's not like you're going to be losing donors that are important to the coffers of an athletic department. And so on all those issues, it's just an easy target. If you have Title IX or financial concerns, which a lot of universities do have financial concerns. Well, I think they're misappropriating their resources, but they do have financial concerns. But then also in terms of Title IX, since female enrollment is outpacing male enrollment at a lot of institutions, and in order to stay within proportionality, it means that university athletic departments are going to start to have to make some decisions with regard to Title IX, if they're going to add more women's opportunities or if they're going to reduce male opportunities. And so I do see this issue continuing to be a factor. I think track and field can make itself resilient if they really do lean on the fact that it is a unique opportunity provider in a way that other sports do not provide opportunity.
I like how you took that, that proverbial onion, that one layer down from the stats, the numbers. There's X many of countable slots, et cetera, and you brought it back down to Tommy and LeBron and Shatrice and Susan. Like, these are real people coming from really diverse backgrounds. I love that aspect. I talk about that a lot with coaching, of like, it's not your sprinter and your hurdler. Well, it's Tommy and Tina. Like, those are real people who have real issues, by the way, they're off the track, et cetera. So talk about this. There's our first like proactive thing. If you don't have an active alumni, I'm going to call it an association. And we're not talking about the general school or even the general athletic department. You're talking about track and field specifically. And you're right. This seems like, I know somebody out there right now is listening is like, yeah, that's great, Mike and Russell, but fit that in between academic worries with my kids and travel schedule and coaching and recruiting. Where does this go? But we're talking about the lifeblood potentially of your program. So you're talking about reaching out to alumni. and creating really a culture, right, of alumni from many, many years and decades coming together to help support and give that, I'm using that C word, that culture of that track is important. It's not just something we did at the university and now we're lawyers and doctors and moms and dads and things like that. Like we continue to support the program. Some will do it financially in many, many dollars. Some will do it in financially in small dollars, and some will do it just in support, maybe coming back to help with a track meet or creating the newsletter or things like that. What other things should a proactive, healthy alumni organization do? And do you know of anybody who's doing that part really well? Like could maybe model this for other people?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So one of the projects that we at the Tracksmith Foundation want to launch within the next year is a toolkit, essentially, of how you can build your own alumni infrastructure yourself.
Awesome.
And I will say Princeton, the Friends of Princeton track is very well organized and very well structured, and funds a decent amount of the program, actually. So I mean, the university funds a solid amount. Obviously, I don't know what the breakdown is, so I'm not going to say percentage. I'm just going to say a decent amount of funding comes from the Friends of Princeton track, which is amazing. In terms of what people can do now in the meanwhile, because the toolkit that we're going to develop, it won't be ready to be published, in the immediate term. And so, there may be some coaches who are listening. Oh, this sounds great. I want to do something now. I don't think the lift needs to be as heavy for coaches as they may be thinking.
Okay.
I think it could be as simple as, okay, I'm going to schedule a Zoom meeting and invite, a bunch of different alumni on the call, alumni and parents, and have it be just an hour and have open dialogue and say, hey, we need to have this for X, Y, and Z. Let's just have an open discussion. But, this is really something that you all will have to, organize. And once you get a group of people together and they start talking, natural kind of organization starts to come about. I've kind of noticed. And there's always someone in an alumni, within the alumni of any sort of organization that has experience organizing folks or developing folks. So what I would say for coaches, like, have the meeting just to kind of have just a broad-based conversation, but with the goal of trying to identify a few people who would be on a kind of initial leadership committee, and then say, okay, this leadership committee will figure out the structure, of the organization, figure out how you guys want to do officers and this, that, and the third. But, for the short term, don't worry about getting too bogged down in kind of organizational details. In the short term, this organizing committee, what their mission is going to be is to have some sort of large gathering at some point a year that's advantageous. So, maybe the university does something really big right before graduation, like Princeton does something really big before graduation every year. Okay, maybe that could be a big alumni student picnic, or maybe your school has a really important home meet that happens in late April every year. Okay, let's do a picnic. I'm thinking it doesn't need to be that. It doesn't need to be as much of a heavy lift as people may think. Just create something that gives an excuse for people to come together. Have some food there because people like to eat. Bring folks together. Have a way to connect the alumni with the students. So maybe it is a track meet, and then after the track meet, the entire team comes in. It's basically just like a picnic with all the alumni. And then have, at that alumni, the goal would be to have all the alumni donate, to the athletic department, and then, from there, have discussions about, okay, how can we make this into a more formalized entity? And so all that planning and stuff, that really can be alumni that do that. I think what all the coaches really need to do is kind of create that meeting and tell them, hey, I need a group of people to volunteer to be organizing, kind of committee. And two, I need y'all to figure out basically a picnic or some sort of gathering that makes sense for alumni and parents and current athletes to come together. I think coinciding it with the track meet just makes sense. And so if that makes sense for that local institution, I think that's probably a good way of starting something. And just being really clear, like, yeah, the organization won't be 100% right now. Once the alumni come together, the alumni themselves should talk about how they can more formally structure themselves, but just get that first thing going. I think is important. And so for coaches, just creating the impetus for that kind of event, I think would be really helpful. And I think coaches would be surprised with how engaged some of the alumni would be about creating something like that. And yeah.
I like that. Get it started, because you're right. Yeah, my mind goes into, oh man, I'm gonna have to do this, and this. Just start with number one. Start with working with your admissions office and getting past emails of past alums. Maybe you have a terrible alumni association. They're like, yeah, I can give you like 10 emails. I have last year, and that's it. We just started doing this. Okay, start with those 10. And hey, you 10, you were all on a team. Who do you stay in contact with through Facebook and et cetera, and build out that database, and start with just a newsletter, a monthly, quarterly. If you think monthly is too much, do it quarterly. Just an update on how the team's doing, stars you got from this part of the country and this part of the country, et cetera. Just get it started until you're right. Kind of, when people get together, organizations happen, right? Sometimes good and bad with that, but the organization can start happening, because I think you're right. Leaders start bubbling to the top. And so someone's going to have a passion of like, man, I really enjoyed my time at XYZ University. I want to help these kids who are on the team today. And by the way, 5 years, these future kids that are going to be part of that university. That's great. So number one proactive thing is, if you don't have an active, engaged alumni track association, start it, get it started. Small kindling builds a big fire. So get it started. What other things can we help bring value to coaches and start working on being proactive and really, I kind of started this as like, how do you not save your program, but like, how do you keep your, bulletproof your program? But more, this is really just how you grow your program is what it's starting to sound like. How do you just have a healthy, vibrant track program?
Yeah. So another thing that I think coaches can do, now this isn't external, this is more internal, more kind of a, in the family kind of conversation, instead of kind of a, external conversation. Because externally, I was really big on, we always need to show a united front. You know what I mean? Like, the track and field community needs to show a united front against these forces that are trying to take these programs away in college. But there are some things that we do need to talk about inside of track and field and some of the factions that exist. But I really didn't want that to be something that I kind of communicated outwardly, because it's like, we cannot show any weakness at all. But one thing that I have noticed, and I don't necessarily have the answer to it, unfortunately, but I have noticed that there are a lot of, I don't want to say a lot. So it was none of the schools that I worked with, but I was at a track meet this spring with a friend, and he was running, it was a grad student who ran at another university, and we were going to a track meet, and he was going to race there. And we saw someone who was on his team, it looked like a sprinter, walk by, and I was like, oh, that's your teammate. And my friend looked at me and was like, oh yeah, I don't know him. I said, what do you mean? He said, yeah, we never see the sprinters or the throwers. He said he doesn't even see the other distance athletes, because the 5K, 10K athlete who's at a pretty high level, so he only trains with one other person, so he doesn't even know the other guys on the team really. And that was just such a weird thing to me, particularly being at a school that was really dominant at the conference level, and that had a really kind of well-rounded team the entire time. It was very strange to me to be at a place where um, that didn't exist. And some of my friends, so the Ivy League, you can't do fifth years there. You can't compete as a grad student. So if a student has extra eligibility, they usually do their fifth year at a different place. So they've done it at, all the, the big top schools. A lot of times, when I would ask them about their experience, oh yeah, it was great for this reason. We went to all the big meets and this, that, and the third. But, they talked about the team culture not being the same, and there not being a locker room culture. I mean, our locker room, at Princeton, we all used the locker room. We all showered together after the meets, after practice. Yeah, a lot of them talked about, yeah, we would just, train and then everyone would get in their car and then drive home, So that part of it, yeah, every school doesn't have like, a robust locker room setup. So like, I know that's not necessarily something that could change, but in terms of kids knowing each other on the team, that is something that very much so is within the control of the coaches. And so I think it is inexcusable that you had an athlete who said he did not know, not like, oh yeah, I don't really talk to him that much. Like, he said he did not know that kid.
Right.
That kid was a stranger. He just happened to be on the track team with him. Like, that is a problem.
Yeah,
And
I
so,
have a lot of empathy for head coaches, specifically head coach, right? Because
yeah,
it falls on the head coach, a lot of things. Because it is such a diverse sport, and the
yeah,
locations just of training are usually, the sprinters are gonna train at one point in the day and be in this corner of the track. The throwers sometimes are halfway across campus and they're gonna train. But you're right, it is inexcusable because there are other ways to do it, right? First of all, maybe there's a way you do it in the bus rides and those kind of things. But have a luncheon at your house or have a events at the bowling alley or whatever. But it takes that intentionality is what it takes. And again, I know there's head coaches screaming at us right now, Russell, that are like, yeah, okay, on top of blah, 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 blah.
right.
And I'm one of the biggest people to say, hey man, not that coaching's an 8 to 5 type of job, but I think more of us need to think of it that way, meaning we put our personal relationships, our spouses and our own children at bay sometimes to a detriment. So I'm one of those who are like, yeah, you got to think track 24/7 and think of your track kids 24/7 because you have other parts of your lives. However, there is intentionality within your team structure as well that should be focused on.
I mean, it could be something as simple as, okay, and I know people are going to say, yeah, this isn't possible in our situation, center third. But in the fall, the only part of the team that is that's competing, are the cross country athletes. It could be something as simple as, okay, we'll have a weekly, just like, meeting or something before practice.
Right.
And yeah, everyone has practice at different hours, different times, but every Thursday or something like that, we'll just meet for 30 minutes just to, go over, whatever, just to kind of have an opportunity for the athletes to know each other, and to be around each other, at least to be able to recognize each other's faces. I mean, because this kid did not even recognize this other kid, which is a problem. The other thing that I think, now this is more of a structural issue, and there are going to be coaches that disagree strongly, and that's fine. We're able to have diverse opinions here. But I do think it's an issue that our sport, particularly indoors, has the incentive is to chase times or marks or competition. And so, for schools that have the budget, they're able to send, you look at their website of, who's competing this weekend. And it's like, yeah, they're competing at 4 different meets because you have some kids up in Washington and a few kids in Arkansas, and then one kid's at Texas, and then another group of folks at the Armory. It's like, wait, what? Like, that's, that, and I get it. I mean, every school every school that has the budget does that. I mean, schools that don't have the budget, they can't do that.
Right.
But, I just I don't think that helps to build a sense of team. But I also understand, with the top 16 system for indoors, where it's just a list, you have to chase the competition. So how do you fix that? I do think the regional system, and I know there's some people who don't necessarily love the regional system, but I do think the regional system kind of,
This
I
guy.
think it kind of addresses that concern a little bit.
Yeah.
Since it's top 48 in the region, you don't get quite as much having to go to this one race at this one track, because that the competition and the track dynamics are such that you're going to get the time that you need. There's a little bit more, okay, just make sure that you're within the top 48, and then you go to regionals, and then you just race your way into nationals. So yeah, again, there's no perfect solution to that.
Right.
But
Yeah,
I do think, but
I will say I agree with you. I'm not a big fan of the multi-meets, on the same weekend. I think that's why I have such a huge love for the conference meet, because no one does it. Everybody's putting everybody out there on conference. No one's saying, yeah, well, you go to Stanford, run the 10K while we do SECs over here or whatnot, So that's why I love conference, and then it's everybody pulling on the same rope as well. I was at Mississippi State. We were not very good in the conference. We'd be down on the bottom, but even the difference between going from 11th to 10th in the conference was a big deal for our team. Like, we were trying to, the kids got into okay, on the 4x4, if we place third instead of fourth, we'll be ahead of Ole Miss. That's really where we're trying to get, is just ahead. But even 10th and 11th and 9th, that was a battle, not just the top 1, 2, and 3, which we wish we could have been there. But that's why I love conference meet, man. It's everybody on that chest running for that school, man. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
The last couple of things you've talked about here, Russell, really come down to one word, and that's relationships. You're talking about alumni and the relationships and having an organization there, team camaraderie, that's relationships, how you structure your schedule, whether you take 3 kids that go to the Stanford 10K and things like that can hurt relationships as well. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about proactivity is that word relationships. What do you think about you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but what about the relationships of the coaching staff and maybe certain leaders on your team as well with administrators in the athletics, administrators within the school, and even, depending on I don't say the level, but the ability, I guess, of relationships with board of trustees. How important is, I'll stick with the head coach, is that head coach, how important is it for him or her to have a relationship with the AD and have a relationship with the president and maybe members of the board? Is that part of helping give your program some cachet to not be on the chopping block, or is that just good to have?
That's a really good question. I mean, I feel like my opinion is pretty biased because I've only engaged with ADs who have decided to cut their teams. And so I have a pretty tainted view of athletic administrators in that regard, but I know that is not fair because, but it's just kind of how my experience. And again, I don't think that many of them, well, I think one, but I don't think many of them were filled with malicious intent. But the impact of the decision still had a bad outcome. And to be quite frank, I don't necessarily care if they're nice people or whatever. The fact that, they made a decision that's going to serve to the detriment of, little Clarissa, little Bobby, Jalil, Sandra, whomever. And the fact that these are life-changing opportunities. I mean, those kids who are playing baseball, lacrosse, they're going to go to college anyway, straight up, they're going to go to college for the most part. I mean, if you look at the cost per sport, I mean, lacrosse, on average, is about almost $2,000 to compete. And that's, the average. That's not even recruitable slots. Track and field is the cheapest sport in high school. Based off the Aspen Institute, less than $200. So
yeah, I get what you're saying there. I know those stats. A lot of that comes from NSGA puts out a lot of those stats of the cost of, not the cost of attendance, but the cost of participation. And you're right, track is always probably the bottom. I mean, because when you talk
It's the
about
cheapest
these,
sport.
yeah, when you think about these other sports, swimming and diving, etc. I mean, first of all, access to those facilities is. You think it's hard to get on a track. Try to find a swimming pool that allows you to dive and things like that without being on
Hmm.
an expensive private club, etc. So yeah, I'm with you on that. I get what you.
Yeah, yeah.
If you're not
So
watching us, what he saw me was kind of giving my like. I'm not sure I agree with that, but I'm with you on this. Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So um, yeah, no. So I mean, it's just and of course, I mean, like there's always anecdotes or people who defy the rules, but in
Sure.
general,
Sure.
folks who participate in some of these more affluent sports tend to be from higher socioeconomic
Hmm.
class, and we just know the higher you go on the socioeconomic ladder in the U.S., this is borrowing from a sociology background, the the more it's more likely that you're going to have the grades and the standardized test scores to go to school, and it's more likely that you will go to college. I mean, so
Okay.
the likelihood, the probability that you go to college just goes up uh, the higher you go up the
Gotcha.
socioeconomic ladder, and it's just like it's positively correlated, along all those different metrics.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
And so, yeah, so to me, like these ADs, need to be aware of the decisions that they're making. But to answer your question, I don't think it hurts, and I actually think it's probably helpful to build relationships with these ADs and administrators if the coaches don't have them already. um and I know there's like a million things on all these coaches plates, but it may not be a bad idea to even at the beginning of each school year just try to get a lunch or a meeting with the AD, just to speak with them, just to let them know about the program, how excited you are about the upcoming year, the incoming recruits that you have. You can invite them to one of the competitions that you think will be great, just something like that. Whether they come or not. But I think these personal relationships, it certainly can't hurt. I mean, if the AD has a really positive personal relationship with you as a person, that may make them think twice before making a decision. It shouldn't hinge on personal relationships, but
Right.
we're all human,
Right.
and
That's
personal
right.
relationships do impact our, how we make decisions.
It may not help, but I have to believe it will hurt if you're just a name, if you're just another name of a stat sheet that you're the head coach Joe Smith, and you stay your life over in your office and on the track and make no effort to have a relationship. I have to believe, well, it's easier to cut that person's program than someone like you said, even if it's once a year checking in. And we have this many people on the roster. We're excited. Hey, we got a home meet. Come to this. Even if they don't you get kind of credit for it, for the invite, even if they don't show up, right? So, yeah, it may not help, but boy, I have to believe it would hurt if you don't have a relationship where it's possible and where it makes sense. I mean, you said it right. We're humans, right? You're not going to have positive relationship with everybody. Maybe some people you just don't jive with. That's okay. There's a lot of administrators that have influence on these decisions. So making yourself being the personable person that you are I think should help.
Yeah, and also, I mean, if you got to play the game, right? So like we've all have had to grin and bear it at different times, and then whether it be a maybe I'm speaking for personal experience, but whether it be a coworker that you don't necessarily jive with, or a boss that you don't necessarily jive with, you've still have to kind of go in and you know work with them and be pleasant and things of that nature. So, my hope is that, all the coaches that are listening are able to have genuine,
Mm-hmm.
authentic, real relationships with their ADs. But if they don't, I still think they should go in and make themselves available,
Yeah.
make the AD feel nice, talk about how, excited you are about the upcoming year, if you are having it at the beginning of the school year, how, you know, how the track and field program, represents your institution
Mm-hmm.
well, and how you are just glad to be a part of the robust sports offerings of the institution. Just things that an AD would probably like to hear. So I think, even if you're like, oh, my AD is dry as dirt, just go in there and just, and have a boring hour conversation. You know what I mean? I think,
Hey,
yeah, I
we've
guess.
all done it for recruits. Not every 18-year-old is the most exciting kid in the world. We're like, okay, look, you better be glad you run fast, my man. Come on, let's go.
I actually think I probably was the opposite. So this is actually ridiculous. So for every school, so I had a notebook. And for each of my recruitment, well, I had a notebook where I wrote down notes for each of my recruitment visits, and I had categories
Oh my.
of stuff, and it was like coach, like team, location, weather. But one of the biggest categories was food, and so I would like open up the notebook, like in like the office with the coaches, and asking them about the food, and writing down notes, and then so it had the whole grid, so I mean, and they would see that I had other schools listed there,
I,
so
I
I wasn't.
I take it you were looking at all Ivy League and Ivy League type schools with that type of meticulousness. You'd have been at Troy University and be like, look, man, what are we doing here? Your food's no good.
To be honest, food was a big category because I was like, look,
Yeah.
I didn't know how to cook then at all. I mean, I just recently kind of become more comfortable with cooking. But yeah, I was like, I'm not going to be cooking anything. So I need the food to be amazing. Like that's a non-negotiable. You know what I mean? So that was a big, like, yeah, I'm like, like they need to have a strong 800-meter program because that's 800-meter runner in college. Need to have a strong 4x4 program because I wanted to also run on the 4x4. They needed to run at Penn Relays because I'm from Philly, and I'm like, I want to be able to
Right.
go to Philly every
Mhm.
spring. Um, there were some other things, but then food, I'm like, that is a big part of my life, and I need that to be on point.
So I can
So
assume Princeton has a great dining hall with food and
Princeton's food was actually number two.
oh, well,
Yeah,
okay, spill the beans. Who was number one?
Cornell. I mean,
Is
their food
that
was great.
right?
Yeah, their
Yeah.
food was really, really
Nice.
good.
Nice. And all
Really
that
good.
boiled down to Fred Samara got you to come to Princeton.
Fred Samara, Freddie Sams. Yeah, no, yeah, I kind of hate. I mean, because Cornell was our rivals for
Mm.
for the Ivy League. I had, I actually was really cool with the Cornell folks, but I was like, Ithaca, it snows all the time. It's cold as crap. I'm like, but this food is great. But I'm like, is that enough? Is that enough? I strongly considered it. I'm not even gonna lie. But yeah, no, that was a major category.
Oh man. All right, let's get back on track, pun intended. What about some other ideas that I had that I thought about? And it may be too granular actually, but what about budgets and rosters? And what I mean by that is you get a set budget, and sometimes that's negotiated right on a yearly basis from the head coach to an administrator. Uh, but is it important to come under budget? Is it important to show how you're using that budget effectively for the kids? And then kind of follow up on that question on the roster side. Uh, um, should we be intentional when we're talking about Title IX and diversity? Should we be more intentional on recruiting minorities onto our teams? And then also on top of that with the Title IX, should we be more intentional? And some schools have this like as a I guess as a rule. I don't know if they can officially make it a rule. I don't know. But you can only have 40 men's rosters and you have to have 80 women's rosters. Is that too granular or what for this conversation?
No, I mean, I think it's fine. So I do want to preface this by saying, I'm not a college coach, never been a
Sure.
paid college coach. I've been volunteer assistant before, but you're not, privy to these kind of,
Yeah.
uh, you know, uh, kind of decision making things. So
Mm-hmm.
I do want to just preference that before I get into any of my thoughts.
Sure.
Just so people are like, oh, that's not exactly how it happens. Like,
That's
yeah,
fair.
well,
That's fair.
I'm just kind of making educated guesses here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, with regard to budgetary issues, being under budget, that's interesting. I mean, the schools that got cut, I mean, they were not wild with their budget at all. They were actually very um they were spending, you know, uh, an appropriate amount. Just that, the aggregate costs of paying for shoes and buses and
Mm-hmm.
hotels and all that, it just it's going to incur a large cost at the end of the year. Now, if there is
Well, hold on. What I more mean is, and I don't know if you saw this stat. This actually kind of blew my mind as well. I saw I'm gonna call it a stat, a study, I don't know, and it was men's and women's basketball. So I know those are two separate programs, and in track we're typically the same program. The head coach is going to be head coach over men and women, but it looked at the food cost, the meals cost that they spent on the athletes, and I would have thought, oh, they're probably similar. Maybe okay, maybe guys eat more. I don't know. I'm doing air quotes there, but maybe they'd spend a little bit more. But within the same school, and these were named schools here. These are the top of the women's and men's college basketball programs here. The amount of food spent for the men's basketball team was, I mean, disproportionately. I mean, it was out of this world more than what was spent on the women's. It was almost like they didn't put this in the thing that I saw, but it was like, oh, the men eat lobster and the women must eat ramen. Like that's how big the spread of the difference was. So when I talk about budget, because I'm big on coaches, knowing your worth and asking for more. We don't spend enough to our point of that it's one of the cheaper per person sports. We need to ask for more, but we keep fighting for your program. You deserve it. More on that discretionary spending. Do I fly to the meet that's 3 hours away instead of the buses? Do we eat filet mignon for the team instead of regular college food or what? You would know more about that, Russell, because that was a big thing for you on that food side. But that's more of what I mean on the budget side of it, I guess.
Yeah, no, so that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think coaches can make those kind of decisions if they feel like it makes sense. Charter a bus to this meet that's a 4-hour, 5-hour drive instead of going to the airport, because it will be cheaper. Also, probably, honestly, will probably be about the same amount of time too, because we have to the airport, go through security, all that stuff. So yeah, I think any sort of cost saving measures in that regard may be a good thing to look at. But like I said, looking at the financial data that was available for the programs that I worked with, it didn't look like there was an extreme amount of kind of spending on those kind of ancillary things. It seemed like most of the spending was on just equipment and travel. And I think part of travel is there's transportation to get there, but there's also like where you're staying. And you can't have the kids sleeping in the tents, like you have to, if you're bringing a team, anywhere, hotels, everyone knows how much those costs, even if you do, group rates or whatever, it's still pretty expensive. So yeah, like my sense was that the coaches were not being irresponsible with their budgets based off of what I saw. And so I am cautious to say that track and field coaches need to think about being even more cautious with their budgets, because I have not seen, again, this is anecdotal, but I haven't seen too many track coaches being irresponsible with their budgets, because I feel like a lot of track coaches kind of sense, that their position at a university is such that they cannot, rock the boat, in that way. Or, I mean, the basketball team, they can spend crazy amounts of money and, no one's going to like bat an eye. Football team, have fun. But I think, in the Olympic sports, and particularly track and field, the sense that I got was that, track and field coaches were very aware that they needed to be intentional about what they're spending and what they're not spending. So I mean, if a coach feels like they can make decisions where they can make some cost cutting practices, sure. But again, I keep going back to thinking about baseball at University of Minnesota and University of I mean, these other sports spend so much more money than track and field. It's crazy. And they are deemed to be okay. So I don't know. It just, to me, I don't necessarily know if that is necessarily the issue, but if a coach at a particular university does feel as though they can spend in a way that might make more sense, then sure, then I support that. And then your question about roster management
Yeah, roster
issues.
management, exactly.
I don't think too many universities will have a problem with you adding a bunch of athletes to your cross country roster, and I know that is padding your kind of your roster in a way that isn't great. But I mean, a lot of universities, well, I don't know if a lot, but some schools, they have like little running clubs or whatever, and they're the student running club may ask to use the track after you're done. If you're a distance coach, just stick around and watch some of them run, and then the top 2 or 3 girls, like, hey, you want to come to join the actual track team? Just pull them in, and you only need to race them. I think they need to compete like once each season or something like that for them to count. Right. So I know that feels really kind of.
Yeah, and I'm not talking about padding in that way. I'm not talking about lowering standards. I'm talking about more being intentional on the possibly being more intentional on the diversity that you bring to your team, and because of the Title IX, the ratio of women athletes to men athletes that you carry on the roster. I mean, certainly, I'm a betting man, so I'd put a big bet on this one, that on everybody's campus, I'm talking about all the way to the whoever's going to win Division I indoors this year, that there are a kid or kids on that team that's like, yeah, you don't really meet the standard, but you're there for one reason or the other. Maybe you're just a hard worker and you do great. You're a local kid or something. I don't know. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's great that kid gets that experience. But being intentional on, okay, I'm going to make sure that I have 2-to-1 ratio or 2.5-1 ratio, et cetera, of women to men on the roster. I'm going to be more, what's the word I'm looking for here? More, I guess, intentional on what men I allow on the team. That, hey, I'm sorry, Johnny, this is not the right place for you because I'm capped at 40. But hey, Susie, you got some potential here, so I'm gonna have you on the women's team. And really this whole conversation is around how do we proactively help and strengthen our programs. Does that have a play in that topic?
Yeah, I think it's situational. So with regard to race, I do think having a diverse team is a net benefit in terms of racial demographics. I mean, all the schools that I helped save, they all leaned on a racial kind of argument to a greater or less degree. And if we didn't have the racial diversity on any of these teams, it would have been much harder, or if impossible, to get the teams reinstated. And so, I mean, I think it is a net benefit, if you carry a more racially diverse team. I mean, the social economic diversity is also really important to me. The issue is that is less salient. You don't see it, and it's harder to argue. It's harder to make a kind of political point around that.
Because you can't see it. You don't immediately look at 100 kids and go, yep, you guys came from poor backgrounds, you guys came from affluent backgrounds, etc.
Right. And also, you don't necessarily always know, the coaches may not even fully know all the time. I mean, they should, if they were, but yeah, I mean, it may not be 100% clear, what everyone's financial background is. So, and if, the coach who recruited that athlete may know, but, some of the other event coaches may not know, and, this, that, and the third. So I just think it's a lot harder. So I always bring up socioeconomic diversity because that's also really important to me, but it's not the kind of, it's not going to, basically what we did was embarrass these universities into changing. It's not going to embarrass these universities into changing in the way that, you're denying Black kids from opportunity, but really all these kids get these opportunities, and I care about all these kids getting opportunities, but in terms of how you can communicate an argument, there's there's a way that's more effective and a way that isn't. So, I mean, the most effective arguments have been, denying Black students of opportunities, also denying female athletes opportunities, because, as we know, many of these programs are combined. We take away the men's program, the women's athletes lose coaches, they lose training partners, and it becomes harder. I mean, a lot of the coaches said it was hard for them to stay engaged with their female recruits that they were recruiting after the men's team was announced that it was going to get cut, because a lot of the top female recruits just didn't want to go to that institution after they realized that it was going to be a women's only program. Obviously there are women's only programs that exist and are competitive in their own right, but when I look at the NCAA and the top programs in the country, they're all programs that have both the men's and the women's side. I think the women do benefit.
Yeah, you took a deep dive into this. What was the podcast you were on with the good lawyer? And I believe it was hosted by a female, and she was a doctor.
Yes.
I believe.
Yeah. She works at University of Penn. Yes.
Yeah. Tell us about that, because I want you to go Google that podcast specifically, because really, Russell and I keep calling him the good lawyer.
Arthur Bryant.
Yeah, Arthur Bryant. Thank you. I'm terrible. Sorry, Mr. Arthur.
No, it's okay.
That you guys took a real deep dive into that aspect of schools that had both men and women, as well as how Clemson got itself in trouble Title IX by cutting the men's program, which flies in the face of what we would just, us non-Ivy League educated people, Russell, would think is right. But you guys, so what was that podcast? Because I'd really want people to go listen to that one. That was really fascinating.
Yeah, I'm actually have done something. I'm actually looking it up right now. So I will give you that podcast name in a second.
And as he's looking that up, what we'll do is I'll look it up at post interview here, and I'll put it in the show notes as well, because that was a really good one. That was one of my favorite episodes there. I really liked it.
Yes. So the podcast was called.
I was trying to give you time, man. I was trying to.
Yeah, I know. So
he's been on so many people. It takes him a while to get to his little podcast Rolodex there.
No, seriously. So Karen Weaver,
yes.
A professor at University of Penn.
Yes.
And the podcast.
I think if you Google Dr. Karen Weaver, Russell Dinkins, I think that'll do it. Yeah, Google's awesome. I don't know if you know that, Russell, but Google, you got to have a lot of information. It'll give it to you.
I was looking through my email, actually.
She was a really good host. Like, I took notes of like, man, I need to do a little bit better job. She was really good. Obviously well educated. I don't think I realized she was at UPenn, so that tells me that. But go if you're listening to this podcast, you're a podcast listener, go listen to that episode specifically. Lots of good, almost like data dump you guys did there. It was really fascinating.
Yeah. So I'll mention the specific name of the podcast as soon. But what we chatted about there, which I think was really awesome, talking about kind of how Clemson's situation was just interesting and a little bit different. So before I mentioned that it's really kind of context specific, that is situational. Clemson's was in perfect Title IX proportionality before they cut their track and field program. So before I just give blanket advice, try to carry XYZ percent to XYZ, coaches would just need to know what the Title IX kind of compliance is for their institution. And it takes a little bit of work, but it's not super hard. It doesn't take an enormous amount of time. What you do is you just look at the ratio of male to female enrolled undergraduates at your university. And then you look at the ratio of male to female student athlete opportunity slots. And so you can find that by just getting the EADA data, so the education and athletics data. Most college sports websites have that data somewhere on their website. If it's not on your website, you can always go to the Department of Education, and you just type in EADA, college athletics into Google, you'll find the website, and then you can pull up last year's data. And then you just take, and it's the duplicated count, not the unduplicated count. So you need to use a duplicated count, which is which double and triple counts track and field on both the men's and women's side. You just see what the ratio is. And so if the ratio is, there's not a hard and fast number, unfortunately. There's nothing in the law that says you need to be within this number.
Right. Interesting.
But, and I don't want to give, basically, if it is really close to 50-50, you're good. If it's not 50-50, you know, you can kind of just scratch on a piece of paper, okay, how many women's athletes will I need to add to the women's roster in order to kind of make sure that this is, you know, in compliance. And so if you do need to, you know, add a few more female athletes, you know, whether it be from campus or, you know, preferred walk-ons, you know, you had 2 400-meter hurdlers that were really good. One, you can offer scholarship to, the other one you couldn't. You can say, okay, you know, we're inviting you to the team as a preferred walk-on, whereas before you may have just said, you know, sorry, this is an opportunity for you. But now you're realizing, oh, having, you know, 2 or 3 more athletes, you know, particularly if they can, you know, you run the 800, would you run 1 or 2 cross-country meets? It's only 6K, you know, you can run in the back, you know, like, because, you know, that one athlete is going to count as 3, you know, because they, you know, participated in that 1 or 2 cross-country meets. So
you know, my mind goes to, I love that. So what I heard you say is the school's female to male ratio. So let's, you know, I'm from Alabama, Russell, so let's use easy numbers.
oh, come on now,
Let's
you guys can
say it's 50-50, okay?
right.
And you said earlier, and I'd heard this as well, that females are going to college at a higher rate than males lately. I don't know what that's, if that's 10 years, 20 years, 1 year, I don't know, but that more females are entering the college space than males. So we're going to say in this magical university, 50-50. Then you said, look at the number, and you used a different word. You didn't say the number of athletes. You said the number of like athlete. You say what you said there again. Do you
Athlete opportunities.
Athlete opportunities. Now, does that mean, is that just another way of saying the number of athletes that are on the squads that year, or because you said opportunities? Well, it's unlimited in track. I could have 1 million people on my track team, but is that what you're saying?
No. So what that means is that, so it oftentimes only counts track and field. I mean, it only really applies to track and field, but it may also apply to, so if you have an athlete at a school that participates in soccer and baseball, for instance, that athlete counts as 2 for counting purposes because they have 2 opportunities. Like opportunity means participation for a discrete like sport or athletic season. Since track and field technically counts as 3 different sports, if someone participates in cross country, indoor and outdoor, they are participating in 3 sports.
Got it. Okay.
And so
where my mind was going then is, if as you as the coach looks at this data, if you're at a program that doesn't fully fund, if you don't have the maximum number of women's scholarships, boy, my mind automatically, because as you use those 400 hurdle example, it's like one, you know, you want a scholarship, the other one you can't because, you know, you ran out of scholarship or whatever, the standard's not there. Boy, my mind went to like, man, what if you got one more scholarship and you broke that down into 10 percenters? You can get 10 kids on the team. Now, you know, I snap my fingers like you just snap your fingers and 10 more kids would join your team, but you know, you got to work at it. But that seems like 10 more kids that you're only spending 10 points on. That means they're spending 90 points on coming to the school. Like that, like you talk about like leveraging towards your administration of like, hey, give me another scholarship. Like there's a way in my mind that it's like, how do you fight for your program and get more resources using that data? But you got to know the data. You got to go look this up.
Right. And you know, it may be, you know, it may actually be a benefit, to be able to, I don't, strategically, I don't know if this is a good idea or not, just to be honest, but it may or may not be a good idea, if you do notice what the town numbers are and you of your own kind of volition, like, add, a few more females to the team as preferred walk-ons, or you split a scholarship up or what have you. And then you say, yeah, I did, you go to the AD and say, hey, I did this to ensure that, our schools stay compliant because it's important for this reason or that reason.
I think you play dumb. Now, Russell, you would have a hard time with this. You're too smart to play dumb. But us guys, you just like, hey, I don't know, Mr. or Mrs. AD, would this help if we did this? Like, and in your head, you already know what the stats are. You're like, I know this would help. Don't you lie.
Actually, I think I think you are 100% right with that. So do
Remember,
not
always
take that last advice.
make it their idea. If it's their idea, don't worry about who gets credit, man. If it's the AD's idea, great, because it'll happen now instead of you just having this.
Yeah, it's
this,
like, yeah, I
this
added a few more women to the team. But is that a good
is
thing?
that a
Like,
good thing?
is that bad? That's
Should I
actually
have done that? And they're like, go
that
for
is
it.
that is perfect. Yeah. Sometimes I think sometimes I you don't want to give away too much information,
Exactly.
and so
Exactly.
yeah, keep the cards close.
All right.
I actually got this podcast up now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it
What's
was
it called?
called, the name was, it's very, I just had it up. Jesus. So it, again, Dr. Karen Weaver,
Mm-hmm.
and the name of the podcast is Trustees and Presidents, Opportunities and
Yes.
Challenges.
Yeah, it's a long one. That's
Yes.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
gonna have that in the show notes because I really I enjoyed that one very very much. Again, because like you almost gave that data dump of all that. Because I found it interesting. The teams that had both men and women progressively did better at nationals and the conference, things like that. I was like, that's genius, man. I just love that. Again, trying to find resources to help fight for your program to get like at Mississippi State, we didn't have indoor track for men. So like, how do we bring back men's indoor, and Minnesota needs to bring it back, et cetera. And Central Michigan's fighting right now for their program. So,
S-
yeah, I love that type
So
of data.
another thing that I could, so this is more, again, not a coach, haven't dealt with this, but I would like to think that, if you are a state institution and you are prioritizing, trying to prioritize in state, I do think that that could be a really positive thing for you, particularly with engaging with trustees, the president, but also, the legislators, because, there's usually, state funds, in addition to federal funds that go to the state institutions. And so, not to say that you're going to have to be hitting up these, your state legislators or whatever, but I do think from an optics standpoint, it probably is helpful. And then also from just a managing, cost or managing your scholarships. I mean,
Mhm.
every state's different, but a lot of states do have, one, the in-state tuition is just lower, but then two, some states have different programs where if, you meet this certain academic category or what have you, you get a scholarship, or you get access to additional funds or what have you. And so an athlete who may be a blue chipper, you may only have to give them, a partial scholarship, because that the rest of their tuition is going to be paid for by this program that they're eligible for because of their academic profile, and also because they're in state. And I'm sure many coaches are already doing this. I just want to encourage them to continue to think about that as just kind of a good way of having great optics, particularly with your female athletes, making sure that you can say, no, we are, because part of the prongs of Title IX is making sure that you are in proportionality, but also making sure that you are providing opportunities that are reflective of the local kind of environment.
Hmm.
And so, and track and field is the largest female sport in high school, and it's probably the largest female sport in your state. And so that is a great argument to have, if there's any issue, because, one of the issues that happened with cutting the men's track and field programs is that often, like with actually a few of the schools, when they cut the men's team, they cut too many male opportunities. So now they needed to amend the female roster, and women's track and field was probably going to be the next target, either severely reducing the roster, or they weren't going to cut it completely, but it seemed like they were going to severely reduce it, maybe cross country only for women or something like that. So, it was really, really important that we did not allow that to happen at all, because I mean, that would have been tragic all the way around. And so, making sure that you can communicate that you're not only bringing opportunity value in terms of female opportunity, in terms of their gender, but also in terms of servicing, providing a sport that is reflective the of the local environment. I can't remember the exact language from Title IX. There's three prongs, and that's what I'm referring to as one of them. But so if someone's listening to that, interested in that prong, they could certainly look it up. Yeah, I think that could be a really positive thing to have, and a feather in their cap.
Well, as we start to wrap up here, Russell, you stole my very last question. Actually, as we were talking about different things, I was like, "Hey, what about in-state versus out-of-state?" And then you just answered it. Very good. Thank you so much for that. But as we do wrap up, Russell, what is, again, the whole goal today is to help coaches think about proactive ways to. I know it's kind of hard to say what the end goal here, because like I said, I don't want to say bulletproof, because I don't want to do fear mongering that you're on the chopping block, etc. But really, it's about strengthening your program and making your program better, not only in regards to the performances and where you stack up in conference and nationals and things like that, but we talked a lot about the relationships. How do you build a culture? Maybe that's what it's really all about, is the culture of your team as it relates to the rest of the university, and then inside the athletic department with administrators, etc. But as we wrap up today, Russell, what any kind of final? I don't know. You're the face of this thing, man. So you got a good-looking face. That's the good news, brother, man. You're good-looking here, man. What is kind of?
It's moisturizer. I will say that. Put on my lotion. I
There you
actually put
go.
on it right before this. I'll show the people this is face moisturizer. Nah, I was like, I can't be ashy on this on the screen.
Love it, love it. Well, what kind of maybe some parting advice do you have for coaches that are, they just want to do better, man? And you've been in the face of some pretty the bad parts of our sport. What just maybe some parting advice maybe for coaches that are listening?
Well, one, I would just like to say, thank you for dedicating this much time, energy to the sport. It often is a thankless job. It is a job that requires so much, emotional, kind of energy, like physical energy. And so the role that you're playing in these young men and women's lives is really, really important. And I know that a lot of you know that kind of, you know, um, intuitively, but you may not always get the external validation that, what you're saying, what you're doing does have a huge impact. So I do want to kind of just recognize that, and to, say that, it is appreciated, and to just encourage you all to continue to be those, really important role models. I know for me, one of the big things when I was selecting a college, was making sure that I had a strong relationship, with the coaching staff, because I knew that I was going to be, spending more time with them than any other adults, at a university. And I really wanted to make sure that I felt comfortable and safe, and and felt like it was a place where I can grow. Um, you know, you're serving, a vital role. I mean, kids come to you guys at 18, 19, they're not done growing up yet. And y'all know that. And so, um, you're helping to raise, these young men and women, and, families are entrusting you with that responsibility. And so, just know that you have kind of an awesome impact, and, that the lessons, the messages, you know, you may not get the immediate, uh, kind of impact, or sorry, the immediate reaction, but the kids are taking it in. And I know many coaches probably have the experience of seeing a former athlete, 5, 10, 15 years later say, hey, that thing that you told me in the weight room, I carry that with me. And you're like, I don't remember saying that, but okay, so, so I will say that. Now, in terms of what the main takeaway would be, you say relationships, I like to say community, really kind of building that community, right? Um, so helping to encourage the development of an alumni community, figuring out how you can create a sense of community with your team, that makes sense for your team. So even if, the distance athletes practice in the morning because you're in the South and it gets hot in the afternoon, and the sprinters can't be dealt with anything below 55 degrees, so they have to practice. They have to practice in the evening. The throwers have to like throw on the other side of campus because that's the only place that has, a throwing circle. Um, there are ways to create opportunities for athletes and for the team to come together and to be in community. And so, thinking about that and thinking about how you can create those opportunities, I think it's important. And, really making sure that, because we all kind of do our own things, our own silos, but at the end of the day, this is kind of one sport, one track and field, um, thing. And I have a lot of, respect for the fact that track and field is a collection of all these different modalities and disciplines,
Mm-hmm.
and and we're all working extremely hard in different ways, so distance athletes may be doing repeat 1,000-meter reps on the track until they're blue in the face, and whereas another athlete is doing really explosive kind of doing lifts and doing plyometrics and things of that nature that will help them with their explosive disciplines. That still, they're working equally as hard, just in a different capacity. And so, I think creating ways where we can kind of celebrate that diversity, and it doesn't need to be. I wouldn't look at it, if I'm a coach, as like a burden, like, oh God, I had to do this extra thing. I would look at it as just an opportunity, to kind of be able to commune with each other in a way that can just, make everyone feel like they are a part of this, one collective goal, which they are. So yeah, so those are kind of the two things that I would say. And I don't think it's going to require as much energy as coaches may think. But just wanted to also just encourage coaches to continue to have kind of the awesome impact, that they have on these young men and women's lives, particularly the young men and women who come from more challenging circumstances. And I know coaches have had athletes in the past and currently that fit in those categories. What you say, what you do, how you treat them has a huge impact. And so I do also want to kind of highlight that.
Well said, my man. Coach, speaking directly to you, it is sometimes a thankless job, and we are sometimes surprised by when we are thanked. So we do get down sometimes. I understand. I did it for 10 years. I get it. Rewind the last 3 minutes and listen to Russell, because what Russell represents right there is your athletes that are on your team right now and the athletes that will be on your team next year. He was in it. He was an athlete. He exactly what he's talking is what he's envisioning his college coach right now. I know you are. You're like, man, that I don't know. Did you get coached by Fred, or who was actually your coach?
So I was coached by Steve Dolan, who
Steve
now
Dolan, of course.
coaches at the
Yes.
University of Penn.
Yes.
And my last year at Princeton, I was coached by Jason Vigilante. And
Oh, gosh,
yeah,
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 great
Viz, right,
people.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Two great giants. So I know you're envisioning those two and the impact that they made on you. So, coach, just go back and listen to that, man, because that is everybody on your team right now. If they could articulate it that way, they would. And if they can't right now, it's just because they haven't got the maturity to say it. We don't sometimes see it in the moment when we're actually being coached. Russell, one of the cool aspects of being the host of this podcast is I get to, at certain points, represent a lot of other people. Like, if you could imagine like a lineup of 1,000 people behind me, it's a great honor and responsibility of mine to do that representation. I get to thank coaches that come on our show on a weekly basis for exactly what you said there. The impact they make, exactly where their 2 feet are, is awe-inspiring and so needed. Not in today's world, because it needed in yesterday's world too, and it'll be needed in tomorrow's world. So you play just a big role. I get to do that now with you, my friend. I get to represent now, thousands of athletes that you have impacted here in the last 24 months, and the thousands of athletes that you'll never see, will maybe not even ever know your name, but that now get to go to the University of Minnesota, William and Mary, Brown University, Clemson. They don't even know that people, and I know it's never just one person. I get that. There's a team, Arthur and other people, but right now you're the face of it, buddy. But so I get to just say thank you from literally thousands of athletes, thousands of coaches, for what you do selflessly. I'm going to go out on a limb and say you have not been financially enriched. You're not rich from this. I don't know how. If you did, please let us know. We'd love to
not
figure out that aspect on our own. But
not rich, but I'm good. So no,
yeah.
thank you.
So well, you have enriched other people's lives, man. And so from the track and field community, for those who do know you, who maybe only know you by name, or even don't know you at all, man, thank you. We need warriors like you to lead the way. And so just so thankful that, you took up that mantle. You could easily just said, man, that really sucks, and moved back onto your normal job, right? So I'm so thankful and grateful that you you did that selflessly, man. Thank you so much from all of us.
Well, thank you so much. And just to end, yeah, I've said this in other podcasts and in other media outlets, but what my source was for all of this, and what my source was, it still is to this day, was thinking and fighting for that kid whose name I will never know. And you hit that point exactly. And um, that's what I was thinking about, with the Brown fight, um, and throughout, all of these fights where, the outcome was certainly not certain, and it was really scary to venture into the unknown, and to look into the faces of parents and alumni and students, and see the kind of desperation in their eyes to get their team back, and to know I had to look at them and say, I am going to try my best. I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm going to try my darndest. And, you know, thankfully, prayerfully, it did work out in a way that was, um, that got the outcome that we were looking for. But what was most important is, that kid, his name, again, I will never know, and that's okay, because for me, what's most important, there's going to be kids who go to college and, they win conference titles and they break records and they win national championships. But at the end of the day, it's really important that these kids have access to these awesome academic opportunities.
Yeah.
And to me, it doesn't matter if it's at a Princeton, or if it's at the third ranked state university in a university in a state. All these academic opportunities are really, really important and can provide life-changing kind of outcomes for these kids. And so I know that these experiences are vitally important, and that is what drove me to dedicate so much time, when I wasn't working, so much time when I was working, um, to this issue. And I'm really, really thankful that so many people from across this country have supported the work that we've collectively done together, and specifically for the awesome group of alumni and parents and students that I worked with at each of these institutions, um, that they were open and willing enough to trust me, someone who was a stranger, um, and were were okay with being led down a path that was uncertain. And that's really hard to do, to ask people, hey, please trust me. I don't know if this is going to work, but please trust me. And we're going to try our best to try to make this happen. And like I said, prayerfully, we got the outcome that we were hoping for.
Well, man, you are fierce, and I am so thankful to be on the same team as you. I would not want to go up against you, man, and the way you bring community together. I love that word. That's kind of the theme for me of this podcast episode is community, man. I love it, and I'm just so thankful for you, man. Thanks for joining us today on the Gill Connections podcast. I'm so thankful for you. Thank you.
Thank you.